I want to read you a part of the Bible. It's from the very end of the Gospel of Luke. Starting in chapter 24, I'm going to pick it up in verse 28. And because it's the end, you know that this is after the events of Easter. Okay? As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it's almost evening and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. So he was at the table with them. He took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. And he vanished from their sight. And then they said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered there. They were saying, "The Lord is risen indeed, and he's appeared to Simon." And then they told what had happened on the road, and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of bread. I'm going to read that again. They told what had happened to them on the road, and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of bread. So last year, our Wednesday night in Bible study went on an epic journey through the Gospel of Luke. It took us months. We wrestled with every single blessed verse and nearly every blessed word. We had so much fun. We put ourselves in the characters. We imagined what it was like. We tried to get inside the mind of Jesus to see why he reacted this way sometimes and that way other times. We had to go and look up some old Jewish scriptures that Jesus was referencing to make sure that he was quoting them right, or was he changing them? We learned so much. But two things really stood out to me. The first is food plays a big role in the Gospel of Luke. In fact, we learned that there are more references to food and eating, and specifically bread, than in all of the other Gospels. So food's really important to Luke. Bread is really important. The disciples are constantly confused by bread, by the way. Throughout the entire thing, they couldn't figure out if Jesus wanted them to get bread or make bread or buy bread or borrow bread. Did they not bring enough? Is he mad because they have too much? They're always confused about bread. The second thing that really stood out to me is after months and months and months of going through the Gospel of Luke, we came to this passage I just read. And it punched me in the throat when I realized, and you can only do this after reading 23 other chapters. You get to this final part, and it dawned on me, what if the entire point of the Gospel of Luke is this one thing? That God is made known in the breaking of bread. What if the Gospel of Luke isn't telling you how to get to heaven after you die? What if God is made known in the breaking of bread is the central message of the entire Gospel of Luke? I've been wrestling with it ever since. I've been sitting with it for months. I've been running it past fellow Methodist ministers to see what they think. I've been running it past people who take communion really seriously and people who don't take communion seriously. And right now, as with all things in our culture, there is a huge divide between people who think I might be onto something and people think that I am way off track with this thing. But I'm going to go out on a limb today, so give me a little grace. I'm going to go out on a limb today and I'm going to say something to you. God is known in the breaking of bread. When you sit across the table from someone, when you eat alone and take in that nourishment, when you go to a church potluck, when you sit socially distanced from your friends at a restaurant? God is known in the breaking of bread. I'm growing convinced that this might be one of the most central truths that I had never woken up to before. So an interesting thing has happened to me being your pastor. Before I came here 4 years ago, I gotta admit I was not very sacramental. It was the one thing that made me nervous about being a Methodist pastor, is that I check every other box. Just flawless theology, all the stuff I love, all that stuff. The one thing I could not quite sign on the dotted line was this sacramental thing, specifically about communion. But an amazing transformation has happened. I'm going to go out and call it a miracle. I have become not just sacramental, I have found myself in a very uncharted territory of seeing the sacramental in nearly everything. I crossed over. I don't know what happened or when it happened, but every month when you and I practice breaking bread and sitting at table together, it was the practice of communion that convinced me of a couple things that I want to share with you today. One, all bread is sacred. Every loaf of bread is sacred. It feeds us. I only learned that because of this bread, but now I see how important and special all bread is. Here's another thing that happened. Because of the communing that we do in this space that I'm sitting in this morning, I sort of came to believe that everywhere was sacred. Not just the sanctuary, but indeed every place, for God is there. God's Spirit is at work there. And because of what I have seen in you and how you have reflected God to me, in that sacred communion of being friends of faith together, I can now see the sacred in nearly everyone. I'm a convert. I have become not just sacramental, I am sappily sacramental. I love this bread that we break. It helps me to see how special all bread is. I love this space, but it helped me to see how special every place is. And I love you, and you have helped me see the love of God in everyone. So I want to say thank you. On World Communion Sunday, I want to say you've won me over. Not by anything you said, but by what we have done together. By communing, by breaking bread, by sharing space, by sharing our lives and our stories. My eyes have been opened in the breaking of bread to see God's presence in all food, in all places, and in all people. We're a part of something pretty glorious. We are part of a worldwide communion. You may not know this, but Methodism has its roots in the 1700s. And since then, still to this day, there are 111 denominations or groups or movements that trace their roots back to those early days of John Wesley and the Methodists. 111 groups, not just the United Methodists. That's a lot of groups. In fact, it represents over 80 million people. 80 million who are celebrating at some level today with us. And that's called a global communion. That's what we call it in Methodism. There's actually a fun British word. They call it the connection, but they spell it with an X. The connection. That's the global communion. And today we're celebrating World Communion Sunday. So I want to encourage you today in the breaking of bread, when we do that in a minute, to open your hearts to the possibility that every piece of bread around the world is sacred. It's special. It feeds us and sustains us. And that every place around the world is part of a global web of goodness. And that every person around the world in this global communion, whether they name the name that we recognize or not, we are all part of this sacred canopy that covers us, connects us, and binds us all together as the human race. We're part of something really special. And it begins with a little piece of bread. Because we bless it, and then we break it, and then we share it. We say it is good, it can't stay the way it is, and I have to give it away. It's good. It can't stay the way it is, and I have to give it away. It's pretty awesome to celebrate this with people all around the world, with the saints back through history and on into the future, this great cloud of witnesses that the cosmos sings in a chorus, a harmony that says, we are all in this together. And this little piece of bread reminds us, food is special. Where you are today is special, it's sacred. And you yourself are a house of the living God. God dwells in you and is pleased with you, pleased to make herself known to you. God is with you. I hope you can hear that today, because it echoes around the world and all throughout history. The cosmos testifies that we are in this together. And it's a little piece of bread that reminds us whenever we take it. It's pretty cool.